your large box companies do a really phenomenal job of giving you tools for your toolkit. I know that's kind of sometimes an overly used statement. They're resourced really well. You've got expensive tools. You've got really great data. You've got gadgets that you can use at your disposal and then twist and manipulate the way that you need to in order to get your business objectives done. So I came from places that are really well resourced and equipped to use said resources. But when you don't have those and you go into a new place, you actually either have to create them yourself. And it's not just pick it up and whatever worked at Microsoft or Amazon will work at any other company. It truly is, hey, I've got these tools. I, in general, know how to frame them. But what's the axon need? How do I customize it for where we're at? And candidly, some of the things that we looked at Amazon, like recruiter productivity, I'll be really direct. I think it's a terrible metric for a talent acquisition team. And so great that was their metric. That will never be an Axon metric. And so if anything, I've probably learned to take some of those resources and then apply them really in a scrappy way to a smaller scale place, and customize it in a way where we can still grow and iterate and learn on them.
What are those productivity metrics that you...
What were they?
Yeah, what were they?
Well, so from a productivity perspective, think about it and this is a group of recruiters, we all know this, depending on the level of complexity of your role, depending on how fast you filled it, depending on if it was a revenue production and again, impacting the bottom line business, whether it was something that was a nice to have, which candidly, we all are very nice to have, right? In the general administrative functions. And so it would be scorecard out by percentage points on essentially how you would quantify if someone was successful. And candidly, I watched partners over in AWS fire recruiters after 3 or 4 months of not actually hitting a metric of productivity. Well, again, we've been chatting for the first part of this evening about our hiring climate is really different. You have to be really thoughtful that we're talking about human capital, not actually like closing a sale. And yes, it is sales, but human behavior is really intrinsic. What motivates somebody, what makes them to say yes or no to a job offer, what's happening in their family life. That's humans that you necessarily can't control. So why I'm such a no, we will never use that is we have to meet humans where they're at. And I lead my team with a very much team sport mentality. We accomplish our hiring goals as a company, not by the individual business, not by our individual recruiter. And so if I have one business lane that's incredibly successful and my other business lanes are drowning and dying and we're actually not doing our job. And so I have appreciated the ability from my C-suite team to lead the team in that way because it allows me to grab people, really great people, and plug them into places where we really deeply need them versus thinking about justifying someone's productivity and their value. Their value is if we hit our hiring goals. When we hit our hiring goals and our revenue team is producing and we're hitting the EBITDA, that's what success looks like, and that's honestly how talent impacts it. So I will literally never bring in recruiter productivity.
With Leif, with you through the Procore, like the 4 or 5 years you were there gearing up for IPO and going through that, was that something that you guys put in place or had in place, recruiter productivity?
Yeah, so, okay, everybody can hear me. It's loud.
Yeah.
I told you I was loud. So Procore, I joined the company at about 800 employees and left at about 3,500. And one of the things that we did that was really, really hard is, number one, we scaled globally and internationally. But what we really started to care about most, and we did this from the very beginning, was candidate experience, right? We knew that as a function, if the experience of the candidate was amazing, we had a much higher likelihood to close, and we saw better metrics on close ratios and so forth. So we certainly looked at hires, we looked at pipeline, we looked at a lot of stuff. We started to measure NPS score, we started to measure candidate experience. We started to measure some things, but most importantly, same thing, right? We cared about the outcome of the team. And so we broke it into revenue, right? And then we also broke it into tech. So it wasn't entirely in line, but what we tried to do with our recruiters is hire people that could do both. And we had a handful in the organization. The organization when I left just a month ago got to about 70 people. And probably a handful of recruiters could work on either side. And as a function, we try to really maximize the ability for, again, same thing, as a function to meet the overall company hiring goal.
Yeah. So if you're not measuring recruiter productivity, what are the things that you do measure and you've put in place to make sure you've got to that number?
Well, it's not only on the recruiting side of it, right? And I'm sure everybody kind of looks at their business partners on how we can scale from a business perspective. So we look at how we can group together job profiles. I think that was something when I first started, it was really, really inefficient. My predecessor had kind of just aligned recruiters to pretty much whatever job was coming in. You can't build funnels and kind of really think again about leveraging experiences of recruiting something in the past if you have never had an opportunity to build that muscle. It's rocket science, I know. But actually really batching the recruiters, not only by kind of attributes and skill sets for the roles that we were opening, but also those roles that were adjacent to. So obviously when you think about like Salesforce development, it is a little bit different than software engineering, but at the same time, there's some attributes where you can actually get economies of scale with your pipeline. And so it was looking at how we were doing it and making some tweaks on the recruiting side of it. And so those KPIs, of course, were hires. It was, candidate satisfaction. It was, time in stage, and really doing that time study to understand, hey, where are we bottlenecked with our processes and why? And the interesting that really came out with why is where it leads to the business changes of behaviors as well. You can't have this really efficient talent team if you don't have fantastic partners on the other side of the house that are going to dive in and be open-minded and get some critical feedback of, hey, you have to change or we'll lose really great talent. You won't close them. You'll create friction. And what's worse, you have an unfulfilled position that's unfulfilled for 9-10 months, or you make some changes, you get involved with your recruiting partners and you can close the role in 90 days. And so there was a lot of using data to actually influence our hiring leaders who, Natalie did such a good job of kind of talking about that education piece. And oftentimes a lot of engineers in particular come from large box companies where it was kind of done for them, perhaps in the past. And so when you're moving into a smaller company where you have to be scrappy, you have to be really intentional with your resources, you do have to re-educate, like, hey, we don't have 100-person research team. That would be phenomenal. That would be so amazing, but we just don't have it. Here's what we do have. Here's what we can do. Here's where we have to bend, and being really meticulous with those expectations. And that's how we've been able to scale so quickly.